Hi, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. A couple of weeks ago when Alessandra got in touch, I thought, well, what do I have to do with cross-motion? Or what do I have to do with cross-innovation? And, with a short conversation, I think my brain just went, and it's still reverberating. There's like vibrations you're probably going to be feeling very soon too, electrostatic, magnetic forces coming to you. And I think when I first started thinking about it, I thought, well, when you start to convert different disciplines and play with different disciplines and the way that you can innovate, the way that you can experience, the way that you can educate, you start to get really excited about this field. And I can't but help, at the end of 3 years of this research, that I'm even more excited that it's not the end, it's the beginning. And so how are you going to convert the research that has been done wonderfully at Tallinn University into the kind of industry and the market that we're going to be expecting to grow? So we've got a few notes. Of course, I'm not going to be teaching you anything new. A lot of this is available online, but I just thought I'd get some ideas together and actually share them with you. And my main sort of, I suppose, interest in this is what if? What if it were to shift? What if it were to change? What if we were to create something that has never been made before? So without further ado, Alessandra, thank you very much for having me here, Tallinn University. It's an absolute pleasure. It's my second time to Estonia. The first time I was here was for Tallinn Music Week, and I was on this stage and I was singing. So you're lucky that I'm not doing that. My background is in economics. When I first started my career, I thought I wanted to be a person that travels the world, and I wanted to speak different languages, and I thought to put them together, I would need to be maybe a diplomat. I knew nothing about diplomacy, and I was supposed to be going to Oxford University to study Japanese, and last minute had an amazing argument with my mom, a little bit late in the coming, and she said, well, what are you going to do with Japanese? And I said, well, why can't I take Japanese? And she said, well, you've got to take something that you'll get a job afterwards with. And I thought, isn't it funny that you are telling me this right now, just before I'm about to get my results, and therefore go to university? And she said, no, you've got to do something that is going to get you some money. And I thought, well, Japanese can get me some money. Anyway, long argument short. I went to university to study economics, and I had never opened an economics book in my life. And you can only imagine when I'm sitting in front of this lecturer with about 100 students behind me, all nodding, and I'm like, what? Demand and supply? What are you talking about? You've created more waste in the environment. This economy has created more homeless people in the environment. What are you talking about? Economics is like the know-all, the kind of measure of success. Are you kidding? Like GDP hasn't actually created anything other than a measure of how much we're spending. But what are we spending that money on? We're spending money on health, okay? Mm-hmm. But then you're spending money, and every single time you spend money, the increase in that expenditure looks brilliant for GDP. So economically speaking, it's fantastic. But the environmental impact, the health impact, the social impacts are actually quite negative. But those externalities are not included so much in the economics that we educate. It's not included in the businesses that we create. It's not included in the products and services that we deliver. So why are we creating this kind of an economic structure? And so I started to realize that the forest actually is an inspiration to me. The forest, when you go to the forest and you walk a beautiful, serene path, you don't see a black bag filled with plastic and anything else that you can find, a toothbrush, wrapped up, knotted, left outside of the dust of the forest, big black sign that says, come and pick me up on Wednesday. You just don't get that. So why don't we create ecosystems? We're creating economies, we're not creating ecosystems. Our planet is not an economy, our planet is an ecosystem. So this is basically where I got started, and I got really excited about it. And I said, well, if there's a way that we can give more than we're taking, instead of zero carbon, zero waste, hey, why don't we all be zero carbon, zero waste? Isn't that fantastic? But all you're doing is actually zeroing out your own impact. I've lived a life of X amount of CO2 footprint, let's say, one of many emissions. But say I've got this kind of footprint of CO2 emissions. If I want to zero that out, right, and if I want to do something positive for the environment, I just negate what I've done. Well, that's not a very clever way of doing it. What about all of the Pacific Gyre? What about all the pollution in the environment? Who's going to look after that? So even the baby agrees. We have an opportunity today, and that opportunity is really about shifting what we mean by cross-innovation, what we mean by building bridges, what we mean by taking down walls. And it's an opportunity to sort of create this, almost like the subtext of a movie, right? You watch the script of a movie and you kind of understand what they're saying, but it's in between the lines. It's the bit that isn't actually spoken, that you understand because of the images that you've seen. And I think that's where we are right now. In our society today, we've got technologies that have allowed us to be as advanced as we'd like to be. It's allowed us to be as creative as we want to be. We've got the opportunity to create and design technologies like this Kenyan startup that's created this really cool like gloves that as soon as somebody is doing gestures for the visually or the auditory impaired, then it actually converts it into audio. So where you might need some kind of actual language from hand signals, you're actually getting words and a linguistic sort of exchange, translation. That wasn't possible before. Somebody hadn't thought about it before, but having thought about it has created it. So it's a very interesting time. It's almost like a call of the time right now to be prepared for the challenges that we have and how technology can meet those challenges. Sustainability is one of those areas. There are many, many more. And I wanted to sort of go into a little bit of detail of what that call of the time is today. I think we've got a very successful industry that is really at the growth stage. We call these emerging tech for a reason, because they are emerging with not only the kind of vision that some people are being able to put out there, but they're met by such a fertile ground for creating this kind of product, this service, this experience. And I think because we've never experienced it before, we're also finding it difficult to sort of put a price on it. But the industry is growing so quickly, and that there is so much competition that is available here, that anybody who's interested and can actually skill up is going to be creating something for themselves, not necessarily a job, but a career. So the Baltic region has some very interesting things that are going on. For example, with a total turnover in the region, let's say, of about 3.2 billion euros, about 14,500 jobs. It's going to be growing massively. I've taken this from Statista. Their forecast just for augmented reality and virtual reality for their market size worldwide between 2016 and 2022 is up from $27 billion to $209 billion. And I was thinking, well, what a strange jump. I mean, there you've got like 6.1, 14.1, 27, and then it jumps to $209 billion. And I'm thinking by 2022, that's insane. This industry is growing so quickly because it's being translated into so many new fields, disciplines that don't exist. And so I got really excited about it, started to do some research on this, and came across the virtual reality, sort of augmented reality app, and the tool that you can find actually on the World Economic Forum. There's a really interesting interactive tool that you can play with. And I found that the industry itself has got so much money available. Let's take, for example, the Latvian government, 2016, put together 15 million euros in order for there to be startup seed funding in this field alone. A lot of the startups have been given visas, easy access to the industry, social and income sort of tax incentives. And I think the policy sort of area is growing in its visual and how this industry is actually going to be growing. Take Pokemon Go as an example, an augmented reality game, free to download, something that has in-app purchases, something, I think, of the range of about 718 million euros that they've made. Niantic has more American and Japanese users on the actual app, and they've pretty much made this industry what it is today. And I think what makes it so successful is that it's not just something that you do on the computer, but it's something that you take outside. It's something that's augmented their life. It's augmented their experience. You see all these people kind of running around the streets, and you think, must be Pokemon Go. So it's created a kind of like a lifestyle. It's created not just an industry, but a way of living. And I think what's really fascination for me is how Pokemon Go has actually created like the hackathons, like a hackathon, the developer sort of opportunities where they've got something like 1 million dollars worth of money available to those that are really interested in creating with them. So it's not just them on their own, it's them creating an ecosystem. Whitlock, for example, transforms workspaces and creates these sort of amazing experiences in the work environment, because the point is that we can actually educate by not having to be there specifically, but by copying it. It's almost as if this automated industry has allowed us to reach even more people. I think one of the most exciting emerging techs is quantum computing, because for me, there is some sense of sort of interoperability. As one grows, the other grows as well. Blockchain, a lot of work that I've done in cities, blockchain, the actual kind of advanced database, call it, something that can actually really relate to artificial intelligence and quantum computing almost changes the game. And I think with the kind of technology that we have and we're seeing right now, something like quantum can actually do wonders for quite heavy data-oriented examples. Another really cool example that I've come across in Chicago was Level X. What they do is effectively create healthcare apps for surgeons, for doctors, and they give them the experience through VR in order for them to sort of do all the surgical procedures. Very detailed work, very skilled hands, and by putting on the gloves and putting on the goggles, all of a sudden they're able to do things that they were never able to do, which are very expensive for them to run otherwise. So it's a puzzle to sort of diagnose the kind of health that we're going to be experiencing in the future. As was mentioned earlier, we're going to be living longer, but does that mean we're going to be living better? I don't think so. Not unless we actually prepare for what is going to be coming in the future. We can't just expect that there's going to be a pill for any other, bad behavior that we have on ourselves. And I think that something like this could be really helpful for extending the healthcare industry to places like India. I was there 2 days ago. I mean, we've got people who in India are suffering incredible amounts, and to know that there is a doctor on the other side is one thing, but to know that you're going to be trained yourself and to prepare them with the skills that are necessary is really quite spectacular. I think there is a bit of difficulty in this field, and to be radically transparent is tough. I think a lot of industry leaders have pretty much sort of ring-fenced the idea and the identity of this industry, and I think one of the things that's really going to help is by creating clubs, kind of like the Future Strategy Club in London, which is all about creating a membership base of freelancers that can come together and work on different projects. And it's a non-profit. The aim of it is to help those within the membership. They have advisors for very specific tasks. But because it's actually creating an ecosystem and it's actually scaling up, it's very different to a traditional corporate, which is it's scaling and has to keep up the scale. This is about keeping it quite slim, keeping it narrow, but helping freelancers to be free enough to do what they really want to do. I think the issues that we're going to be experiencing very, very soon, it's a very different case in Estonia, of course, walking down the street and not seeing any poverty like you do in India, is that the world is 2/3 Asian. And there's a brilliant book that's just come out by Parag Khanna, The Future is Asian. I think there is a huge identity crisis that we're experiencing, especially those that travel and can see different parts of the world, like, say, China and in India, and to experience the kind of challenges that we have here. There are huge amounts of products and services that we can provide to places like India because we have the experience to do so. We have the imagination to do so. We don't have to be worrying about where our next meal is going to come from. Are we going to be protected from the environment? Do we have a shelter over our heads? And I think that this gives us so much more of an advantage in Europe to be able to do that. There's a brilliant publication that came out recently that I was part of, and it was launched in January at Davos, called The Moonshots for Europe. It's an organization called Future.io, and it's really about what is the direction that Europe is going into. What are the policies that are going to have the biggest impact? Where are the collaborations possible, the bridges possible? What kind of partnerships are there at the moment? There are examples of that. I think the European sort of model is an example that really allows us to understand where the challenges of bridging and walling can actually play a part. I think we've all experienced the negative sides of Brexit, and the potential of a no-deal Brexit at the end of March is kind of like almost an emotional moment, I think, for all of us. We're seeing the Sustainable Development Goals developing in a way that have taken what used to be the Millennium Development Goals all the way from the Earth Protocol, all the way from the Kyoto Protocols, and they're moving so quickly, and we're getting to see this whole industry develop. The World Economic Forum has put a figure of 2.5 trillion, and there's a gap there, kind of like the 227, right? There is this massive jump that we're about to make, and that technology jump is for you as an industry to take advantage of. We're also seeing this sort of digitization of our lives, smart cities, smart everything. Maybe lacking in smart citizenship, but we're hoping that will come in later. The smart digitization of our life in every single sort of experience, lifestyle experience that we have in our cities is really fascinating. On the one side, you've got this massive digitization of everything, all the data that is being collected. What do we do with that data? How do we secure that data? How do we run analysis on that data? You've got the GDPR, which is all about where and how that data is held and what can be done with that data. We've got this sort of growing identity of ourselves in the digital realm. What about our own identity? Who uses that identity? How do we digitize our own sort of list of things? I mean, how many passwords do you have? For how many websites have you applied of some sort of user profile to? I mean, if you were to map your digital footprint from the time, I don't know, 1996 to now, how many different websites have you accessed? What has been your digital footprint? There is a map of absolutely every part of that. And I think what's really interesting right now is where that identity of you online, your sovereign identity, let's say, the ownership of your identity, the ownership of your avatar can actually then relate to this sort of more open cross-motion type industry, which is, how do I become digital? I've already become digital. I am visible digital. But where is that helping me? How am I doing something that is an experience online, maybe in a game, that is then helping me in my actual life? Is there a way that I can be, much more fluid in my experiences in the gaming industry, let's say, if I were to play a game, but it would actually benefit me in my actual life offline? So I think there is this huge connection between the conscious and the unconscious. There's an exciting technology called Neuralink, which you may have heard of Elon Musk working on at the moment, where it's about sort of digitizing your brain and uploading your brain to the internet. I'm kind of excited about that, a little bit scared. I'm not too sure what people would think about my thoughts if they were to read them. But I think our relationship with the digital world is evolving. We're much more comfortable with seeing digital devices. We're completely and utterly bionic friendly. If you have like a replaced hip or knees, it's absolutely fine if you had an operation, let's say. So when is it going to be that we're going to be including these sort of enhancements on ourselves, but more aesthetically? So for example, instead of having the operation on the eye so that you can see better, you can actually put these lenses on right now already. But you can also put plastic in there. And then, I learned this yesterday night when I was learning about the way that we can enhance our capabilities. The American soldiers are already enhanced in their abilities. I remember a publication in the New Scientific, that the New Scientists that had the sort of lineup of all the different things that they were testing on soldiers. And I think there are very big complications and questions on the ethics of that. But no two experiences are the same. No two companies are the same. No two ideas are the same. And I think we're at that point where we can really sort of grow this industry, but with a very mindful, very heartfelt sort of direction. And I think that direction has some very, very specific things to it. One of them I call protocol.earth. Imagine if for the Earth you had protocols or a consensus that you worked with. Blockchain works with the basis of a consensus. But the consensus is almost like a political system. And if that system is constraining what we can do, then it's time to change that system. What is the ecosystem, therefore, that we can use in order for us to apply our education today into creating a future that makes sense to us? How can we gamify positive impact? How can we create behavioral economic shifts and campaigns and create sort of experiences that can allow us to be more environmentally friendly, to be aware of the impact that we have, and not just in terms of the GDP and upgrading these economic older structures of the 1930s, but actually how do we design something that is, say, 100% biodegradable? How do we live in the future? And I think more than anything, it is, how do we want to play? How do we want to imagine something of the future of our own lives, our industries that haven't yet been made. Imagine in 50 years' time when we think back to this moment, what are you hoping that you will have done in that time? So that's the end of my presentation, and I think I'm ready for some questions.
Tia, that was fascinating. Do we have any questions from...
I heard that Estonians don't like to ask questions.
They don't.
Is that true? No, that's wrong.
There we go. There we go.
Are you Estonian? No. Oh my God.
There you go. Are you okay without the mic? Maybe you can...
Yeah, sure. I suppose my question is just, so what do you think, like, where do you think this problem stems from? Because,
which problem?
I mean, you're talking about, like, the problem with the environment.
Right.
I would just like to note that it's like you're saying that it's the human beings is the problem. And I would just like to ask you, do you really think that it is human beings that is the problem? Or perhaps it's just the society we live in presently? Like, since 100 years ago, it's been a system where the perspective has been driven upon, like, a capitalistic perspective, right? And as far as I'm concerned, I see your evaluation of possibilities in this same capitalistic perspective. I mean, you're quantifying the potential, like assessing what's going to happen in 2022, right? And so I'm saying, why are you doing it in the same manner as they are?
Well, thank you very much. What's your name?
It's
Frederick.
Yeah.
Frederick, thank you very much for that. Firstly, I think that climate science as a science has developed in so many ways that we could never have imagined. 20, 30 years ago, we weren't even in the know of what kind of impact environmental degradation was going to look like. 1960s, when the Silent Spring was written by Rachel Carson, little did people know, or industry know, or maybe a villager like myself would have known that this is the impact that we're going to have on the environment. It has shifted so quickly that we're not too sure what to do with it. So there's a confusion there. Part of the confusion is it scientific? Enough? Question mark. Do we need to do more research? Is there ever enough research on this subject? Number two is, what can we do about it? Because effectively, this is almost like an existential crisis for us. As a race, as a community, as a society, we have to question what it means to be a human today. And if we know that this is shifting and changing, is there something that we can do about it? Are there specific things that we can do to impact the environment? And when you go in the middle of the Pacific and you see that there is these pieces of plastic that are there, that are floating about, you question what our impact is. This is not about, oh look, the CO2 footprint is XYZ. Well, CO2 sort of remains, water shifts. I was in the Antarctic over the New Year's period, and I realized that actually it's not the ice is melting, it's multi-year ice is melting. It's older ice that is melting, and that's never going to come back. So the Earth is shifting, and we know that for definite. Anthropogenically, what can we do about it? Well, firstly, we can stop putting our waste into the ocean. So when you look at the ocean, you see all the streams of the supply chains of where it all came from, say the Blue Planet kind of documentary by David Attenborough. You start to realize that they come from very specific rivers around the world, one of which has a big impact is from India. And you will see all of this plastic just sort of trailing down, it's just disgusting, trailing down into the ocean. But whose responsibility is it? If I can turn to one toothbrush and say, is that yours, Frederick? Are you going to say yes or no to me? Because you've thrown a toothbrush away, I know you have. Once in your life you have. So have I. So it's not about blame, it's about doing something about it. So what can we do? Now we're going to move to replenishing. So capital, there's nothing wrong with capital. We live with capital. We capitalize on resources, right? Every country has a resource. Sometimes it has a competitive advantage over that resource. Some countries have used oil for 50, 60 years with the idea that they were helping an industry. Actually, so much good has actually been created from that oil industry, because if you were to look at the way that Shell, as an example, I don't know much about Shell, but if you were to look at the number of exhibitions, the educational courses, the opportunities of environmental sort of research that has been made primarily from the people that work there who've been making money, right? Somebody needed a job at the time. 2, an industry that has created not only transportation in itself, an ability for you to move from here to wherever it is that you've come from. You're not from Estonia. So the industry itself, it's very easy to point fingers and say, I blame you for X, Y, Z. I don't think I'm here to blame, and that's why I'm not the same. I work on the idea of replenishing planet Earth, and of course, I am just as bad. It is not about saying that I'm better. It's about saying that I understand that what I've done in the past is not so good, and I'm willing to do something about it to change it. Replenishing is about living in harmony with nature, and how do we do that? So I recycle everything that I have. I try not to buy anything that I don't need. I eat as simply as I can. And yes, I do travel. I travel to educate. I travel to educate and learn. Because I understand from having learnt all of these different methods and ways that actually we can change one very specific thing, and that's a philosophy. Capitalism is a philosophy, and it's been really successful in providing that philosophy. You've got a philosophy, you've got an economy, and you've got cities. Cities are the manifestation of that philosophy. So if you want to shift that, you have to go down to the philosophy level, the philosophical underpinning of what it means to be a human. So this ended up being a bit more of an essay-type answer, Frederick. I don't think you were expecting that, but I hope we can have a longer discussion later.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
I'm not giving essays.
Yes, this gentleman. Yep.
I'm
There's a microphone if you want to use that.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Petri from Start North Youth Community. I have a question about impact-driven businesses, and now that you were talking about corporate and then businesses which are driven by shareholders. So have you been thinking about or dividing companies on like evil companies and impact making companies? Because we have a trend, like you said, that there's 100-fold increase in sales within different industries, AI, VR, and a lot of the so-called impact evil corporations are taking a lot of the human capital to do projects that are not meaningful, and like Google is doing projects that will never become a project. So we have a problem in like with these companies that they're not solving any impact problems.
Do you know the way that I see it is almost like a yin-yang, where you have like the yin-yang symbol. Whenever you see that, you realize that there's good and there's evil, both of which are judgments. A little bit of, like the good has like a little bit of the evil, and the evil has a little bit of the good. It's almost like a balance that we're looking at. And I think that to point fingers at companies that have otherwise provided all of the people that work in the industry a job, a home, a healthy lifestyle, an ability to actually go and look after their children, to pay for the goods and services that they need to live a good lifestyle, it's actually quite complicated. And so when people say that, is this a good company and is this a bad company, I think companies themselves are realizing what they're doing that is positive for the environment. If you look at Coca-Cola, 2014 I did an innovation workshop with them in Buenos Aires, and one of the questions that they asked was, what can we do that can make a positive impact? And I said, well, stop providing people with an incredible amount of sugar in your drinks. I mean, that's the most basic thing, right? But jokes aside, I thought, wouldn't it be really fun to use your distribution service? You, in the middle of a village in India, will find a Coca-Cola, but you won't find a tetanus jab. You'll find the most basic of things that we don't even think too much about. But here, where you need a health service, you can't find that. So where's a Coca-Cola and where's an injection? Which one's going to help you more? But to piggyback the distribution service that Coca-Cola has across the world and to provide health information and education to the local villages that would otherwise not have it is exactly what they did. And I think that there are many companies that are now not going to last very long unless they're thinking about what you and I are. Impact is about what kind of a positive impact can you have. But who's there to tell us this is the range between the positive and the negative impact? I mean, to say that, I went to a company and I created like 20,000 jobs, which clearly I haven't, I don't have that experience. But to say that you've created 20,000 jobs, does that equate with maybe having a negative impact on the environment? There are so many different factors, and this is why I wrote a short sort of article about the Sustainable Development Goals, and I said, it's not one at the cost of the rest. It's not, we're going to do Sustainable Development Goal number 1, and then the rest of them we're going to completely ignore. It's about doing all of them. And that's where it becomes really complex and difficult. Because now, let's say you're in industry, you use a lot of dyes, but the dye is then washed out. And you're paying a very specific group in a village, say, in Africa, to create those dyes. But they're not good for the hands, and they're getting all sorts of kind of chills and blains from them. Who are you going to help? Do you help the people that are working in the company, or do you help the people that locally are actually being impacted from your product just by using it, just by touching it? And I think that there is a moment now that we have to look all across. There isn't just one part. It isn't just one SDG that we look at. It's all of them. And I think that's where it becomes maybe a little bit more complex for us to measure the impact, because we've got to be socially, environmentally, financially beneficial. And that across the board is, it's a hard time, but that's our challenge. Businesses are changing. That's their challenge. Businesses can't remain as big as they are, because if they keep on scaling, they're actually not beneficial for their own shareholders. Their stakeholders are actually saying, well, you're not making us enough money. And they're saying, well, we need to have an environmental impact that's positive. So tough. Something's got to shift. And I think business itself has shifted. Social enterprise, social impact, they weren't words 20 years ago. They weren't even thought about. They weren't needed. We didn't have a reason to show that this is what was necessary. And now we have to show that, no, we are a social enterprise. This is what we do specifically. We help the environment or society. And I think that shift in the ethics and the meaning of what people have attached to businesses is a really interesting time. So startups are leading that kind of innovation and entrepreneurship in that field. A longer discussion with you later, fine.
Okay, I think that's all we have time for.
Thank you very much,
Tia. And
Thank you all very much.